So the focus of this panel discussion and these presentations you're going to hear are stakeholder engagement. We want to be able to understand how important it is to hear from those that matter, those that can help avoid conflict and further the goals of what organization we're talking about. I'll talk later about the Respect Big Bend effort and how we use stakeholder engagement to really bolster up that effort. Actually, Judge Cano up here was on our stakeholder advisory group, as were Faye and Jesse in the last panel. So a lot of great folks helped us out in that effort. Our first speaker is Tracee Bentley. She's the CEO, President and CEO of the Permian Strategic Partnership, a collaboration between local communities and oil and gas companies operating in the Permian Basin. Her extensive experience and leadership within the industry well qualifies her to lead this first of its kind partnership. Before joining PSP as its first CEO, Bentley was the executive director of the Colorado Petroleum Council, a division of the American Petroleum Institute, which focuses on state and local policy and supporting the development of Colorado's energy resources, including hydraulic fracturing and energy infrastructure. And I was going to read the rest of that, but it goes, you got a lot more experience before that. Let me get the rest of them real quick, if you don't mind, Tracee. James Oliver has not done near as much as Tracee had. No, I'm kidding, James. James is the Director of Engagement at the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, who's one of our primary partners at BRI. He's a lifelong rancher with more than 15 years of production ag lending experience. He brings a unique understanding to discussions regarding land and succession. His previous banking employers include National Finance Credit Corporation, First State Bank of Uvalde, and Bank One and its successor, J.P. Morgan Chase. He currently sits on the board of directors of Ozona National Bank, a regional community bank. You're also a director, I believe, with the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association as well. And, apologize. Eleazar Cano, the Honorable Eleazar Cano. He's an Alpine High School grad from 1984, which was a very good year to graduate high school, I might add. St. Edward's graduate in 1989, political science, criminal justice degree, master's degree in education. 1996, he's a licensed professional counselor since 1998. He's been on the staff at Sol Ross as a therapist and adjunct instructor since 1998 to 2014. He became Brewster County Judge in 2015 to the present. He went ahead and put this in here, so I'm going to brag on his kids. He's a daughter in Anchorage, Alaska, who just broke the school record last week in the 100-meter hurdles. Middle daughter in Belgium, working on a PhD, working on carbon markets, sustainable alternatives. His eldest daughter is a finance major, and her husband is a Dodge Chrysler executive. He's bragging on those girls, and he should be. His term expires December 22, and he's not running again. So we've been very blessed to have him in Brewster County. Excited about that, whatever the future holds for you, sir. All right, Honorable Judge Shuster. Joe Shuster is in his 20th year as a Pecos County judge. He's a long time, before that, was a long-time business owner in the Fort Stockton area. He and his brother, for those of us that can remember this, have had a Gandy's milk distributorship and distributed milk, Gandy's milk products throughout much West Texas. He's got 3 children and 3 grandchildren. So the idea here is we're going to hear from Tracee. She's going to talk about the importance of strategic partnership and working with engaging with our stakeholders. Then we're going to hear from Judge Cano next, who represents a county that has not seen a lot of energy development, but is concerned and hopeful that we do in the future. It's a great opportunity to see some economic development, but there's also impacts that we want to get ahead of. And then James Oliver is going to give the perspective as a stakeholder from the ranching perspective. He's a longtime rancher, has seen development, and just give some thought to that stewardship idea that we talked about earlier with Dennis. And finally, Judge Shuster is going to talk about Pecos County, which has seen an immense amount of development, both oil and gas as well as wind and solar, and his perspective on balancing all those development scenarios with what's good and bad that can come with that. So we'll start with Tracee.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here today. Since I committed to doing this, I've been so excited about having this conversation. I'm a farm girl. I grew up on a farm and ranch in southern Colorado. And one of my very first jobs out of college was working for the Colorado Farm Bureau, where energy happened to be in my portfolio, really because nobody else wanted to take it. And I said, well, we've got a lot of energy in Colorado. We've got an awful oil and gas, certainly. We've got some wind, some solar, some hydro. So I'll take that on. I'd like to learn more. So as my career progressed, it turns out working for the governor, then I was able to bring my rural perspective and my knowledge primarily of agriculture, but then combine that with then my knowledge of energy. And I would, if you would ask me back then if I would have ended up working for the oil and gas industry, I probably would have called you crazy. I would have been like, no, that's not where I see myself going. But here I am, and I can tell you there are no two industries that I love more than agriculture and energy, because really those two industries are the heartbeat of rural America, which is exactly where my heart resides. So I've been excited for this kind of conversation. I haven't been in front of an audience like you all since my time in Colorado, so thanks again for having me. I thought today what I wanted to talk to you about is, I was asked to speak about, as you heard before, the Permian Strategic Partnership. I want to give you just a couple minutes of history about why we came to how we came to be, because I think it's important for the conversation that we're having. And then some lessons learned, both not only from myself, but my 17 companies about creating partnerships and stakeholder engagement in the 3 years that we've been in existence. So I have been in the Permian for 3 years, like I just said. My family moved down here for this amazing opportunity. There's nothing else like this partnership, this coalition in the country, which really, really intrigued me. The other part, as I was looking at, can I live here? Do I want to move my family down here? Is just driving around on many, many occasions and talking to folks and seeing the willingness to have conversations with strangers who you don't know, you don't necessarily trust, but you automatically come to the conversation with goodwill. That was a game changer for me. And I think those things are absolutely critical in the conversations that you all and that we all are having today. So for a minute, I want to talk about the Permian Strategic Partnership and how we came to be in the first place. So we all know, it is no secret, you can't see that yet. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. That world energy demand is growing. It has been growing, but right now it is growing at a rapid pace, a pace that perhaps we haven't seen before. So whether anybody likes it or not, world energy demand is growing. Next, we know that there is one U.S. region that has experienced exponential growth in energy development, and that region, to nobody's surprise, is right here in the Permian Basin. Next, we all know, if you live here, you know the challenges that are associated with this increased energy production activity, right? There are all the environmental things that I think you all have spent the good portion of your day talking about, but we would suggest there are many societal challenges that have also come along with that. The investment in our social infrastructure just has not happened in the way that it should have happened for a very, very long time. And we'll talk more specifically about what I'm talking about in a while. So now you've got 17 global energy companies who have decided that the vast majority of their investments they're going to put in the Permian, not only their financial investments, but also their human capital. And they need workforces here, people who just don't want to come and work for a couple of years and do their tour, but who want to invest in this community and raise their families here. Yet we've got all of these challenges that in many respects have been neglected. So what do we do about it? So a couple of companies, of these big companies, which we'll talk about in a minute, came together and said, are you having trouble getting a workforce here? I am. Are you? Okay, well, if we are, a lot of people have to be. So pretty soon this conversation went to about 17, it did in fact go to then 20 actually of these companies, and they said, well, what are we going to do about it? Because sitting around wishing our problems would be solved and complaining is not getting us very far. We can't rely 100% on government, whether that's state or federal, to solve our problems, because that's not going to happen. So we better be leaders and do something about it. So out of that conversation and a bunch of research sprung the Permian Strategic Partnership. So energy companies that have come together to help respond, and keyword is help here, to the social or societal changes that we're facing right here in the Permian today. So when it comes to ESG, and I know this is a buzzword right now, everybody's talking about it everywhere you go. Certainly my companies are in their boardrooms. An awful lot of attention gets paid to the E, and I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't. But what we're not talking a lot about, at least to date, is the S, or the social. the impact on local communities of our amazing resources that we're developing here. So we believe that we are one of the strongest voices when it comes to the S and ESG, certainly for our area, maybe in the state and our region. So who are these companies? Off here you see a list of them. I know it's kind of small, but you can see there's 17 of the larger companies. We started off with 20, but due to mergers and acquisitions, a couple of those on the list bought others and merged, and so now we're to 17. But it's pretty amazing that this list of companies, who, as you all know, I don't have to tell you, are fierce competitors. They are out day to day trying to outdo each other in every way, fashion, or form. Yet under the Permian Strategic Partnership umbrella, all of that is put aside, and they come together and say, how can we collectively, we're all on an even playing field, make the Permian Basin an even better place to live, work, and raise our families. So how does one do this? How do you even set a group like this in motion? Well, we started off with a significant amount of research, but even more than the research, we went to stakeholders in our community and we said, data shows us one thing, but what do you think about what we should be focused on? What does our community need the most? Realizing we can't be all things to everybody. What should we focus on? And it truly is from those about 250 surveys or so that we gleaned our focus areas. And where we landed on after that was these 5 key focus areas. So education, healthcare, infrastructure, workforce development, and affordable housing. Now I will tell you, when we did this study, it was 2018, early 2019, and at the time, the housing market here, was impossible. Nobody could find a place to live, and if you did, it was outrageously expensive, and let alone find an apartment, 1 or 2 bedrooms. So anyway, the market has helped with the housing, we would say, and so right now we are laser focused on education, healthcare, infrastructure, and workforce. That's not to say that housing isn't important, however. Anyway, you can see our mission right here. It's to strengthen and improve the quality of life for Permian residents by working with stakeholders at the federal, state, and local levels. We are 17 oil and gas companies, energy companies, if you will. What do we know about how to improve access to quality health care or to make education the best, world-class in the state, maybe even in the country? Well, what we bring to the table is passion. What we bring to the table is resources. And we bring together the ability to reach out and say, let's all, a bunch of smarter people than us, get in a room with experts and let's figure this out. And we've been at this for 3 years, and it sounds daunting, and believe me, there are days I go to work and I'm like, how on earth am I going to tackle this one? But when I step back and say, it's not me tackling anything, it's not even these 17 companies. We have amazing, amazing resources in our communities, in our stakeholders that are going to show us, going to lead us how to get there. And it's worked pretty darn amazing for being 17 companies who really didn't know if this was going to work or not. So I would just want to give you one example of our success so far. So in 3 years, the Permian Strategic Partnership, these 17 companies have invested $93 million of our own money. But the more impressive number is we've turned our $93 million and leveraged that with our partners into almost $1 billion that's gone right back into the Permian. And I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see under there, hopefully you can, it's not too small, where those dollars have gone into, where they've been invested. There is no way we could have invested in 3 years $1 billion without stakeholder and partner involvement. There's just no way. And it's amazing to me, once you open up a conversation in one of these topics, or really any topic, and you say, we can't go at this alone, but we're in it to find a solution. Now, it may take us a while. It may take us 2 years to figure out a great solution to STEM centers in the region or whatever it may be, but we're gonna work it through, and we're not gonna give up, and we're gonna listen to everybody and figure it out. While imperfect, the model is pretty good, and we believe that it can be applied to so many of the conversations that are happening right here, and conversations that I bet you all are having. So there are, however, some incredible lessons that we have learned along the way. And I think these are really important for us to acknowledge as we move forward. We need to do more listening than talking. Like I said before, we are 17 energy companies who are incredibly passionate and have some resources to put into this, but we are not the experts in any of these topics. So listening, when some might suggest we are used to talking more, has been, it's going to be paramount to us moving forward, and it has been important thus far. Also, I think we've learned not to make assumptions in a couple of ways. We cannot walk into a room on any one of these given topics and assume we are the expert, or honestly, even we know a quarter of what we're talking about. I think we've made those assumptions, and almost every single time they have been false. So don't make assumptions about what we know, but also don't make assumptions about what our partners and our stakeholders know. I am constantly blown away about the depth of expertise that we have in this region, and I've underestimated it. And that's because we made assumptions that we shouldn't have. So making assumptions can be a very dangerous thing. We've also learned to meet others where they are and not where we want them to be. So when we're working with a community and we're talking about healthcare, and we say, my goodness, there's just a more efficient way for our emergency services to work together across county lines, and if you all were on the same system, well, my goodness, that may be what we want them to be doing because it seems so clear to us. But when you go sit down and talk to the hospitals and to the emergency care providers and all the people who actually have to do this on a day-to-day, of course it's not that simple. And of course that may not be the best solution at the time. So meeting others where they are at and not where we want them to be, we have learned to be very key. And one thing that makes me really excited, because having worked for industry for a long time, previous to coming here, and government for that matter, thinking big and outside of the box. I don't know that it's something that we're known for, but I can tell you it has served us incredibly well. If a solution isn't in front of you, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we've got to be a little more creative. It's going to take a little more work. And how are we going to get there? Not, are we going to get there? How are we going to get there? So thinking big, sky's the limit, doing things that we've never done before, creating partnerships that industry's never partnered with before has been amazing to see. And I see these partnerships that are unique to us translating so far down the line. So we may have a partnership with a university and a foundation to bring mobile clinics to part of the Permian Basin that is mostly underserved when it comes to healthcare. Well, guess what? Those same partnerships now want to work with us on, what if we were able to take the same concept and apply it to literacy and to some of the other areas that we're working on? We have partners who now trust us, that we can now build upon, and we're building on every single partnership that we've built, and it's really neat to see how those are not just one and done relationships. It's truly amazing. I know that you all have witnessed that too. Have a big tent. I think sometimes we all, and I'm certainly guilty of this, think, okay, if I get too many people under the tent, oh my goodness, are we ever going to come to resolve? Are we ever going to find a solution? Maybe if I pick these 5. I mean, it's easy to do, and sometimes there's reason to have a small group, but what we have found is the more input and the more stakeholders you have coming into idea, number one, it just gets better, because somebody's always going to be smarter than you in the room. Somebody's always going to bring a perspective that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And you are allowing a space for buy-in. So it's no longer somebody else's idea that they're talking to me about. Now it's my idea, and I had a say in this, and I had a part in it, and I'm bought in, and I want to make it work in my community. That has been so fundamentally key, and I know that that requires patience, believe me. Anybody who knows me will tell you that I am not known. One of my strengths is not patience. But boy, is it worth it. Taking that time to meet with every stakeholder who wants to be involved has paid off in dividends for us. So it's something that we're going to continue forward and really take our time and be patient with. I think I mentioned this before, but again, if you're like me, a type A, and you have this great idea, and you just know if people would listen to you and help you make it work, it's going to be the best thing that they've ever seen. Why didn't we do this before? And so sometimes we get married to our ideas. And I've married some, and they didn't work out for various reasons. And looking back now, it's easy to say, well, that probably wasn't. In fact, it wasn't the best idea. There's a reason maybe why it didn't work out. So bringing ideas to the table is incredibly important, being solution-oriented, like I heard in the last panel, but marrying your ideas to the point where you can't see anybody else's perspective and ideas can also be dangerous, and it's a lesson that we've learned along the way. I could really go on and on about the lessons we've learned, but those are some in thinking about moving forward, and if we had a couple of do-overs, how would we position ourselves? Those are just a handful. We believe, and we truly believe this with all of our hearts, we are upon a once-in-a-generation opportunity here in our region that brought us together for a common purpose, and that is to strengthen the communities where we live and work. We know this resource is going to be here for a long, long time. We also know the world is going to need our resource for a long, long time. There is a way to be economically viable while also protecting a quality of life that those of us who have moved here or have lived here for a long time have come to love and cherish. There absolutely is a way to do that. There's also a way to make our societal challenges to flip that on its head and make us a destination. We believe we can be a destination for education, for healthcare, for workforce. We just need some more collaborative conversations to happen and some investment in us. Come alongside us. We don't want you to fix it for us. We want you to invest with us. So anyway, I really, really admire and appreciate the conversations that you all are having just like this. I think they're vitally important, not just for our region, but for moving forward as industries change and evolve, but yet still must work together. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for listening today.
Good afternoon. I hope you guys are doing well. And just a quick, I guess, disclaimer. Back when I first came back to Alpine, back in the first gentleman that I met up at Solar Ross, by the name of Mr. Bill Wren, him and I met, and at the time he was doing quite a bit of counseling. He was a therapist. He's an LPC, a lot like, same title that I have. So it's kind of interesting, all these overlaps of kind of our lives, our careers, our education, and how sometimes you end up doing things that are kind of out of your comfort zone, but then I often question, are they really out of our comfort zone? When I first ran for office, one of the first things that I was asked was, well, you've never been county government, state government. I'm not a politician. Let me make that clear. I'm a public servant. And I believe that. Deep down to the bottom of my heart, that's what I do. I have constituents that I'm accountable to. On the way over here today, we're talking about EMS. We're going to be doing a new service because unfortunately we lost some providers over the last couple of years. And now we're looking at starting up a new service. And one of the things that we talked about quite a bit this morning for a couple of hours on the drive up from Alpine was that we need to make sure to ensure accountability with this vendor, because our constituents rely on us to ensure that that's what we do, for our community. Before I go on too much further, I do want to mention a couple of things about my kiddos. And I brag about my girls, and I have a son as well, but I'll get to him later. My oldest daughter, 30-year-old young lady, is married to a gentleman up in, he's from Michigan, but they live in Arizona now. He's a Chrysler guy, he's a company man. A big old tall kid. He played hockey in high school. even in my best of my best days, I could not have taken this kid. His legs are this big, man. So he's a big boy. My daughter, finance major, she went to school in San Antonio, got her degree at St. Mary's. Very proud of her. She spent time in Dallas, and she ended up moving up to Michigan for a while. You know, they meet up and they get married, and they're a happily married couple. My middle daughter, again, Billy mentioned, she's in Belgium. I have a daughter that's working on her PhD. This is her second tour in Europe, and she will, in 2 years hopefully from this coming December, she'll be a doctor. So I'll have a doctor in the family. And it's interesting because the areas that we talk about in here and with Respect Big Ben, she and I have had some long conversations, but she sees things from a European perspective, global, you know, kind of policymaker is the way she's headed down her path. So I'm really, really proud of that kid. My youngest daughter of those three, Elena, is up in Anchorage. She's the boy before I had a boy. Okay, let me say it again. She's my boy before I had a boy. This kid is 90 pounds nothing. She is, I mean, if you saw her walk into this room, you would think she was a high school kid. Little bitty girl, but her legs she's all legs, is what happened. She went to Anchorage. Interesting story. Her coach up there, my coach back in the day, here in Alpine, his son went to Anchorage on a track scholarship. He stayed there, and he recruited my daughter. Now we're going on 7 years. So that's a really neat story that as far as you know, how small the world really is, I think that I'm seeing it firsthand. But the reason I like to brag on my kids, aside from the fact that they're pretty awesome, is because what I do today is what I'm forecasting down the road 20, 30, 40 years from now, that these kids are going to inherit the earth that we, you know, leave behind, basically. I mentioned my son. I have a 7-year-old little boy, and I also have a 3-year-old daughter. So I got a 30-year-old girl over here, a 3-year-old daughter. So if there was any doubt that I care about the earth, put that aside. Because that 3-year-old, I mean, can you imagine what the world's going to look like in 50 years? More than likely, you know, God willing, I'll be long gone by then. I don't want to live 50 more years. That's just too much time. But I'm thinking more about those generations because it's very personal to me. I grew up in Alpine. Again, graduated back in 1984. You know, almost by dumb luck and happenstance, I end up, you know, being judge, you know, which is kind of cool because a lot of what I do is basically it boils down to relationship building. I've heard a lot of talk about that today. That's what we do. I mean, if you think about your positions, Superintendent of Big Bend National Park is sitting over here. Will you stand up, sir, just real quickly and kind of give a nod and shout out. And I met this gentleman about, 4 years now? 3 years, 3 years ago. And I was very, very impressed when we met that his whole take was, we want to be part of the community, part of Brewster County, part of Alpine. I've seen this gentleman more than some of the folks that live in Alpine, you know, in my office, around town. Some of it is business related, but a lot of it is, you know, he's part of the community. We've had a discussion about landfills and waste, and one of the things that we talked about is you know, recycling and how in a few years they're going to run out of space down at the park. What do we do as a community, as a county, in combination with the Big Bend National Park and the federal government? There's a lot of interest in grants and things that are happening as we speak of what do we do with refuge, landfills. As we all know, human beings, we consume a lot. And in the process of consuming, we create waste. I don't want to be ugly, and we all eat and everything is good, but that's kind of what we humans do. To me, we talk about oil and gas and solar. Part of my question is, what are we creating that we're going to have a hard time with time to get rid of? It's a real weird shift in paradigm, if you will. South Brewster County, there's a whole bunch of land with a whole bunch of nothing on it. One of our biggest needs is water, and I think that's, you live in the desert, that's a big challenge. The other part of that equation is, as a county, our biggest development, economic development piece of our county budget is tourism. The Brewster County Tourism Council, it's a separate branch, but they're still county employees where Robert is. They actually, every year they generate right at $1 million of revenue, just hot money. And that's just what we capture. We know there's a lot more out there that we haven't been able to identify and capture locally. That number has grown by about 20% throughout the past 5 years. We've been discovered, and I think Bob could speak to that. Najitas, we've got, the folks down, Greg Headington, the river rafting, the roads. It's beautiful. I was trying to get this thing to give us a little bit of a visual. If you could hit it, yeah. Okay. Of a visual, so I just want to show you all, my backyard. It's pretty cool, and also Bob's front yard. So that's even cooler. But as I was sitting there listening to some of the other presenters, it occurred to me that where's Miss Faye Walker? You could raise your hand, Faye.
You're talking.
Oh, you're talking. Oh, okay. See, I caught you. I also teach some, so I always know who to call on. No, Faye. Could you stand up, ma'am? Just real quickly, stand up. Do we know each other? Okay, have a seat, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. The reason I bring her up, or the reason I called on her, is because as I was sitting there listening to her presentation, it occurred to me that she was helping me write my script. She said a word that got my attention. Well, she said several words. I think it was good information. But all of a sudden, I started going to the area that I know, counseling, mental health, behavioral health. And the word was balance. It's amazing how many things that have been discussed this afternoon, if I put them in that paradigm of what I, kind of my area of expertise, how much it coincides with the environment, with energy, with power, with human resources, with industry. You know what it boils down to, folks? Survival. You think about it. What are we all trying to do in this room? Make money and try to balance, kind of maybe some capital and invest money. But at the end of the day, there's parts of the world right this minute that people are struggling to survive, literally. You think in terms of what we're doing in our bigger picture. As I mentioned, my daughter in Europe, she's got a different perspective about energy, sustainable energy, carbon markets. It's funny because the older I get, it's almost like, man, if I was 20 or 30 years younger, I could do some damage. But you know what I do have? I have kids. Did I mention I have a 3-year-old daughter? So a lot of these things, I think it's up to us, as stewards of our property, our land, our earth, to try to start figuring out how can we sustain this long term. Not consume as much as we can, go to the buffet and just boom, 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 but how do we do it in a responsible manner? When Billy approached me to be part of the committee or the group, it really rang to what I believe in is, what do we do? What am I doing? What am I going to leave behind? Yeah, I have a daughter in Anchorage who has a track record up there, and I'm very proud of that. But at the end of the day, in the bigger scheme of things, is that going to be my legacy? Or is it more what we're doing here today? What are you going to leave behind? And I think it's up to us to be responsible stewards of what, and I believe in God, and I say, God-given to us. What are we going to do with it? Even if you don't believe in that side of it, there's a lot of resources, natural resources, that we need to take care of if we're going to sustain our way of life and our way of living. So a lot of it, again, going back to Ms. Walker, thank you for helping me write my script. But that's what it takes. And somebody said earlier, so many times, you know what we have to do? The biggest thing to do is listen. And don't jump on the first bandwagon that comes across, because sometimes that thing may be heading down the wrong road. We need to step back. Be patient. Be calm. Don't panic. You panic, that's when you get in trouble. COVID. I remember seeing that headline in the Alpine Avalanche. Judge Cano shuts down Brewster County. I'm like, really? It wasn't me. It was a lot of research. But to this day, there are folks that felt that I panicked. You know what? If I save one life, I can live with that panic. But that's a soapbox thing. I'm not running for office again, so I don't got to worry about that anymore. All right. But yeah, folks, I think so much of what we do, throughout our day, once you leave here, again, going back to Bill Wren and contributions he's made, me being from Alpine, I grew up in Alpine. That's my home, So I believe in what I'm talking about, because you know what? It's easy for me to promote what I know and what I believe in and what is important to me. That's my priority. One of these days, when I'm long gone, I'll have kids, but I also have people that I've come in contact with throughout the past 8, 12, 20 years that are going to say, you know what, maybe Judge Cano did more than simply have a gavel in his hand and orders to sign. Those things are important for governance, right? But I think we need to look at the bigger picture. What are we doing here today? What are we doing here today? That's my challenge to you all, because everybody here, there's a brain trust of people in this room that are a lot smarter than I am in certain ways. But I think it's when you come together and you share that energy and that power that's kind of circulating, that it becomes a really cool thing to see grow. Permian Basin, I believe Judge Shuster's going to speak, or he's going to come up either next or at the end. But him and I, we're literally 60 miles apart, but we live in different worlds. Oil and gas. I mean, he's been in the game for a lot of years. There's almost like a line that goes between our county and his county, and then you jump into Brewster County, and we've got very limited resources. But the most valuable resource, human beings, man. And that'll never change. Thank you.
Anyway, good afternoon, James Oliver again. I'd like to touch briefly on my work with Texas Ag Land Trust.
Take it out if you need to.
Is that any better?
Yeah, better.
I've been with the Texas Ag Land, there it went, sorry. Texas Ag Land Trust since 2016. We are the largest state-based land trust in Texas. The goal of Texas Agricultural Land Trust is to provide landowners with tools to help them conserve and protect their farms and ranches. The tool that we started with and has been the most used tool is the conservation easement. From the onset, the intention of the land trust was to become a resource for landowners, to have a complete toolbox of options to assist landowners. Today, for example, with other partners, the Noble Foundation, the Texas Grazing Land Coalition, AgriLife Extension, and Texas A&M's Natural Resource Institute, we're developing guidelines for landowners that are interested in the carbon markets and carbon sequestration, and the guidelines to help outline what landowners need to look for as they go through those searches. Anyway, it's how I got into this Respect Big Bend project. It's been a lot of fun. We feel like we've helped a lot of landowners. We hope we have. In addition to that, in my personal life and the things that, one of the reasons I get up every morning and a lot of the reasons that I get woken up in the middle of the night is we have a ranching operation. I lease some ranches in Crockett County, Terrell County, Valverde County, and we also deeded country in Crockett County. I represent the 5th generation of family ownership, and my 2 sons will be the 6th generation of ownership. And Dennis put this very, very eloquently and said it in a very heartfelt manner. But with the blessing of that land ownership comes the blessing of the obligation of the stewardship of those resources for the next generation. The stewardship of our natural resources, the stewardship of our financial resources, the stewardship of our energy resources. And we are also, I feel, obligated to steward the heritage and legacy of the next generation. The things we do today is what we pass on to them tomorrow. In my opinion, and both Faye and Judge Cano just touched on this, the key is the balance. And in trying to find that balance, there is not a perfect answer. There are trade-offs. In order to steward my natural resources, my forage, my soil health, my water, my wildlife, my livestock, what is that blend of species, sheep, goats, cattle, do I use? What rotational program, what grazing programs do I deploy? As far as financial resources, where do we put those financial resources to work that have the most beneficial long-term impact? Things that our children aren't going to have to rebuild, things that aren't getting our children into traps. In energy, and there's no denying in the agricultural world that energy and the revenue from energy has kept many of us on the land for several generations now. But as we look at those things, what balance of energy resources do we deploy? We do currently have some oil and gas production. It's a very mature field. It's pretty well depleted. Renewables. Of the 2 sons, I have one that probably will not come back to the ranch. He loves it. He loves to hunt. He loves to help. He doesn't want to live in that part of the world. Given that, do we find, I've got an area that's less than a quarter mile from a major transmission line. Do we look at renewables? Do we try to develop additional oil and gas fields? Do we wait again until the dry gas prices are low enough that we might be able to buy our own production back and release ourselves from some of the older leases? We're not always perfect in this, The slide I had, that was my fault. And it was a picture of what a livestock grazer would think was heaven. It was just grasslands, green grass. That was the good. The bad was what we often think about, and I'm not picking on oil and gas because this applies to our grazing operations, our hunting operations, every other stewardship resource, but it's usually what we think of as a field that's been overproduced, where the spacings are, 20 acres. And then the balance was 2 pads set alongside a road underneath a wheat field. And so that's kind of the point of trying to find that balance. I feel like the work we do at the Ag Land Trust is trying to help other landowners find that balance that works for them, for succession, for estate tax purposes, for the conservation of their legacy, their heritage, their open space. In my own personal life, my motivation is to steward those resources in a manner that I can pass to my children in the most beneficial balance at that time, because things do change, that will sustain their ownership into future generations. It's really ultimately, to me, about the viability and the sustainability for the next generation of things. So I appreciate everything. I've enjoyed it, and thank you.
He gave me all the time left, so I do want to make a distinct clearance between Brewster County and Pecos County. There is a difference, and he hit it on the head. He hit the nail on the head. There are two different countries over there. I'll give you an example. Energy Transfer, and everybody here knows who Energy Transfer is. They decided they were going to build two pipelines from Waha plant in Cano, and one was going south to Presidio to Mexico, and the other was going west to El Paso. And they were both Energy Transfer lines. And those in the courtroom that day, I had the president of the company and three underlings, and I'm sure there were vice president 1, 2, and 3. So you know how these big corporations are. But they said, what kind of problems are we going to have when we get to Brewster County? And I go, well, you don't have to worry about Pecos County. We're oil people here, so we know. We understand. But over there, get ready. Come to find out, the former county judge, her husband, handcuffed himself to one of the bulldozers over there on the pipeline. So you see the difference in Pecos County and Brewster County. So that really wasn't, that wasn't part of my talk today. Whose glasses? All right. I'm going to speak to two things this afternoon. One is partnerships pays developments. Up here on the screen, you'll see the latest edition of the County Progress magazine, and it just came out Friday, and I didn't know it was coming out, but it came out. And it talks about our solar energy and wind energy. And when I was elected in 2003, our mission was to diversify the economy in Pecos County. And so solar farms were already on the horizon and coming and being built in West Texas. Upton County and Upton County and Pecos County and Reagan County were the three biggest counties that were recipients of the wind energy. And so when I got here in 2003, we accumulated 3 more wind farms in Pecos County. We had a total of 5 when we got through, and today we have 4. We had one that tanked, and it tanked because of construction problems. The bases were not built correctly, and after 10 years of wobbling up here in the air, they came tumbling down. So they decided to destroy and tear that farm down, so we're down to 4. But in the meantime, in the last few years, we've been fortunate enough to be lucky to be in the middle of the best sun rays in Texas, going east and west across the state of Texas. And so we've had plenty of companies with solar energy knocking on our doors. And right now we have 11 solar farms in Pecos County. And we've grown our appraised value to the tune of $2.1 billion. We have 3 more solar farms that are in the wings right now. We were also lucky enough, I guess, when you're trying to diversify the economy, we were lucky enough to get lithium-ion batteries that are going to be sitting next door to substations on electric lines. And so we've got those. But you know, we didn't diversify our economy. We've got plenty of value sitting on our property, but we don't have any employees because each solar farm is about 3 people. Don't let them fool you. It's about 3 people, no matter how big it is. We have 3,500 megawatts, and I wanted to talk to the man that was here with the other energy corporation because they didn't even show Pecos County on the map there, and we have 3,500 megawatts, and as soon as we get these other 3 farms up, we'll have 4,000 megawatts in Pecos County. But here's where we've all heard that saying, even a blind squirrel gets lucky and finds an acorn. Well, over the last 20 years, we finally got lucky. We have 3 data centers that are locating in Pecos County, and they're going to locate next door to the what am I trying to say? I forgot where the energy is, and they're going to be located there. Out of those 3 data centers, they're going to be hiring 125 people now at $65,000 and up. So we did get lucky. There we go. That squirrel found an acorn. Thank you. Then the other thing about it is it has diversified our economy. But I want to show you one thing up here, and I think page 2 is on there. If you look up in the top right-hand corner as you're looking, you'll see the solar panels from the air. And I do want to give Apache a thank you, because there was 2 companies that we had to deal with in order to get some leases moved around and so on and so forth within the sections so that they could both be applicable to the same property in the same ranching areas and so on and so forth. And Apache sat down and they had 2 or 3 meetings and they worked out the differences along with Concho. But Apache was the first one, and so I've never forgot that. And there's been other companies that have come along later on in the diversification time that sat down and did the same thing after they figured out, well, if Apache can do it, why can't we do it? So they take a section and they look at it, and with directional drilling anywhere today, they can just basically sit in a section and say, we'll take this one and we can go 4 different directions from there, or we'll take this corner over here and we can go there. And we can work the solar farms in and around and leave plenty of land for oil production and exploration and gas. So it's worked real well with us. And so it's a proven fact that, much to dismay to all of my Facebook friends, that oil and gas and green energy cannot work together. They sure as hell can. So I just wanted to share that success story about our energy in Pecos County. I will say this, that we have improved our appraised value from we were down around $3.3 billion, and today we're at $6.1 billion. So it is a diversification in that sense. But I do want to talk about something else that has to do with oil and gas. And it's been mentioned here several times this afternoon and this morning about orphan wells. Pecos County, up around the Imperial area, which is anybody in West Texas knows about Imperial and Grand Falls area. Back in the 20s, they had a boom there, and they drilled wells, and they had the wildcatters out there, and they'd get drunk at night and go out and start to sputter and going, and they'd drill a well, and there wasn't any records to be kept or anything like that, and so on and so forth back in those days. It was wild, and that's why they called them wildcatters, more than one reason. But in the area of Imperial, since 1920s up to today, it's 2022, we're about 100 years later, we're seeing the encroachment of 3 different aquifers there that have been breached by what we say is oil wells. And the Railroad Commission says, well, they were started as oil wells back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, but now then they've been handed over to ranchers and farmers for water, so they're now classified as water wells. Well, the acidity and the H2S in that area has eaten the pipes up, and we all know what happens. They've been breached. So we've got 3 different aquifers in that area that are now one aquifer, which is not good. And we are working with Railroad Commission. We've had several meetings with TxDOT. And the reason we met with TxDOT is because since about 2005, we have had what is called a subsidence on Highway 1053. And that subsidence is now somewhat 100 feet below the road on Highway 1053. And it was a oil well to begin with, later turned into a farming water well. And it did get plugged. And I don't remember when it got plugged. It was somewhere around 2004, 5, 6, somewhere in that. And since then, it's continued to sink. And Highway Department likes to call it a subsidence. I call it a future sinkhole. So that's the difference in the terminology. We do have a problem, and we are working on it. And so we've had a success story with our solar and wind energy and getting along with oil and gas energy. And now we're going back and we're looking at trying to fix a problem that was caused over 100 years ago. The records are there. It's just a matter of talking it through and sitting down and having the discussions with the right people in Austin. I know that the Railroad Commission has applied for like $300 million to address orphan wells. Well, in today's market, it's about $20,000 to plug an orphan well. So at $300 million, that's I think that's 15,000 orphan wells, and we have more orphan wells. Is that correct? My math is it 15,000 or 1,500? Because we have, in Pecos County, we have 263 orphan wells. This is last year's numbers. And Permian Basin has 930 orphan wells. There is a chance in the state of Texas for the wells that haven't produced in the last 10 years, they're candidates to become orphan wells. That's 140,000 possible orphan wells in the state of Texas. We have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. So that's something that we're working on now. I'm not going to panic, and I want to try and fix and alleviate the situation the best way it can be done. And it's going to take a lot of work, and Austin's going to have to be behind us, and that's with all of us. With that being said, I have nothing else to say tonight, this evening. Thank you very much.
Judge Shuster.
Any questions?
We have a few minutes for questions. I don't want to, we're going to take a short break after that and meet back for our last session, and then it's happy hour. Any questions?
I don't have a question so much as a statement. I appreciate Judge Shuster talking about that orphan well problem. I want to kind of clarify some of those numbers. There's 40 of those flowing water wells up there at Imperial, and those are not $20,000 plug jobs. Those are potentially $2 million plug jobs for each well. They are very expensive to plug. That is a huge monumental problem. The one that's created the Beamer Lake, the H2S level is so high in that lake that they sent a guy out there to take samples in that water. He was out in a boat, and he had to wear breathing equipment because the H2S level was 9,000 parts per million. Every time he'd stir the water up, the H2S would have killed him if he had not had oxygen. And that's a flowing lake from one of those water wells. And that sinkhole that's in the FM 1053, that was a botched plug job by the Middle Pecos Groundwater Conservation District and TxDOT, they partnered on that well, and they screwed that plug job up. They spent over $300,000, and that well, to go in and plug it today it's gonna cost millions. But they need to go plug that thing properly. They're gonna have to set up and directional drill to plug that well. But I do appreciate Judge Shuster speaking to that problem. It is a monumental problem in Pecos County. I can promise you it's going to get some attention, and it's going to get fixed one of these days. But the problem is if that the oil and gas industry does not get behind fixing that problem, it will get fixed, but we may not have a say in how it gets fixed. The fix may come from Washington, or it may come from some other place in the country, but it's such a big problem that we cannot continue to ignore that anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions?
I'm also going to comment on orphan wells rather than ask a question. My name is Virginia Palacios with Commission Shift. We produced a report going into detail on orphan wells, and just to clarify some of the numbers that you remarked on, Judge Shuster, there are currently, as of end of March, about 8,400 orphan wells in the state of Texas. Those are wells that haven't had an operator on file for more than 12 months. That's the highest we've had since about 2007. And then there are about 142,000 inactive, unplugged wells in the state of Texas that still have an operator on file. And so it's important that we think about that inactive, unplugged well population and how to manage that and hold operators accountable to paying for that plugging so that it doesn't end up becoming the state's problem and becoming landowners' problems later on down the road, because we can see how expensive it can be to deal with these problems. And with the federal funds, there should be about, the calculation is about $341 million potentially coming to Texas to plug orphan wells. If it was just the average $20,000 cost to plug a well, then it would plug 16,000 wells, but the Railroad Commission has said that about 300 of the orphan wells on their list are offshore or bay wells, and those can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to plug. So we are going to run into a point where, all that federal funding can't plug all the wells, not to mention the fact that we're adding more orphan wells to the list every single year, even though we're plugging about 1,500 wells a year. So it is a problem that we need to figure out how to get ahead of.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Any other questions? Got Alex running. Yeah, could y'all group your questions together, please?
Well, I don't know if I need that. I just want to add to this orphan well issue, and I'm a surveyor by profession. In fact, I was chief surveyor for Mobil Oil. Hello? Yeah. Anyway, I'm a surveyor by profession. I was chief surveyor for Mobil before the Exxon merger. My piece to this whole puzzle, the orphan wells and the P&A, one of the problems I have with the Railroad Commission is their GIS data set is probably very misrepresented to where that actual well is located on the ground. Its spatial values that you get when you pull it out are probably 60% of the time on the legacy wells are incorrect, anywhere from 100 feet to hundreds of feet. And I've done a lot of forensic auditing on a lot of wells, so I can feel comfortable saying that throughout all of Texas. But the Permian, and the other one with the orphan wells that we're talking about in, say, Pecos counties, there's a lot of those wells are not even on record, and they don't even know they're there. In fact, we're going to go out on Friday and pick out some along the Pecos River that we've seen, and there's salt water coming up the well bore that were back from the 1930s. And those aren't even in them. No one has any records of those. And those are orphan wells that don't have any ownership. And the 269, that's just ones that have been mentioned because the company went bankrupt. And the one company, there's 100 of them on Schuyler's property. So he's sitting there with this liability that no one wants to take ownership in. Anyway, I just wanted to let everybody know that you know, from a surveyor standpoint, where that well is on the ground is not where that is in that GIS data set. And I'm going to relay a comment that he was the godfather of GIS in Canada, and he made a statement that I'm an old timer, so 1981 that I still remember. He said, just remember this GIS world we're going into, it'll be garbage in but gospel out. Because once it becomes digital, we all believe it. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents to that. Thank you.
Thank you much. Anybody else?
Somebody over there, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I want to thank our panelists again. It was a fantastic session. We appreciate you so much and taking your time out to come give us a perspective on stakeholders and how important that is from an industry perspective as well. Thank you very much.